The execution chamber aboard the Celestial Tribunal had been built for only one purpose: deciding whether entire civilizations deserved to continue existing. No species had ever walked out of its judgment unchanged. Some had been elevated into the galactic accord. Others had been sterilized from orbit before they could spread beyond their first moons. The chamber itself reflected that cold philosophy perfectly. Endless black stone stretched beneath towering pillars of silver light, while hundreds of representatives from the oldest civilizations in known space watched in absolute silence. At the center of the chamber floated a blue sphere. Earth. Supreme Executor Vale narrowed his luminous eyes at the projection rotating above the floor. "Confirm the anomaly report," he said quietly. 1,000 screens ignited at once. Every species in the chamber stiffened, not because they saw weapons, not because they saw advanced technology, but because none of it made sense. "This," announced the tribunal archivist, "is humanity." The first recording appeared. A primitive atmospheric vehicle spiraled out of control through violent storm clouds, while alarms screamed across the cockpit. Internal damage exceeded 80%. Multiple systems were dead. By every known predictive model, survival was mathematically impossible. Yet the human pilot inside the vehicle was laughing. Actually laughing. "Why is he laughing?" one representative whispered. The footage accelerated. The pilot struck broken machinery with a wrench, rerouted power through components never designed to connect, and somehow stabilized the craft seconds before impact. Probability of survival, 0.003%. Outcome, successful emergency landing. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Then the next recording began. A human mining colony suffered catastrophic reactor failure deep beneath the frozen oceans of one of their outer worlds. Safety protocols demanded evacuation. Logical strategy dictated containment. The humans ignored both. Instead, exhausted workers used improvised explosives to intentionally collapse part of the facility on themselves because one engineer believed the pressure wave might somehow reboot the coolant system. "It worked?" another delegate asked cautiously. The archivist hesitated. "Yes." Silence followed. Not impressed silence. Uneasy silence. Another recording appeared immediately after. Human soldiers trapped during a planetary conflict. Surrounded. Outnumbered 12-1. No supply lines. No viable escape. Tribunal analysts expected surrender within 2 hours. Instead, the humans weaponized weather satellites, overloaded their own armor cores to create decoys, and convinced enemy forces they possessed reinforcements by broadcasting fake arguments across military channels. The battle ended 43 minutes later. Human victory. Executor Vale finally leaned forward. Pause. The chamber froze. He stared at the image of the human commander standing atop burning wreckage with blood running down one side of his face. The man looked exhausted, terrified even, but he was smiling. Not the smile of a predator, not arrogance, something worse. The smile of a species that genuinely seemed to enjoy impossible situations. "Run predictive cognition analysis again." Vale ordered. The tribunal superintelligence responded instantly. Error. Human decision matrices remain inconsistent. Another error followed. Behavioral outcomes cannot be reliably forecast. A third warning appeared in crimson across the chamber. Caution. Human subjects display abnormal probability deviation. Now the silence became fear, because the galaxy had seen this once before. Long ago, before the collapse wars, before entire sectors vanished, before the ancient civilization known as the Ethrin destroyed themselves experimenting with minds that could bend statistical reality. Executor Vale slowly rose from his throne. Continued the report. The archivist swallowed visibly before nodding. The final incident occurred 72 solar hours ago on Earth. The next recording activated. Unlike the others, this footage came from inside a small engineering workshop, somewhere on the human homeworld. Nothing about it appeared important. Scattered tools covered every surface. Half-disassembled machines littered the room. Music played faintly in the background while a lone human worked beneath a damaged beverage dispenser. Several tribunal members looked confused. "This," the archivist said carefully, is the moment our long-range sensors detected a temporary rupture in localized space-time. The chamber darkened. Readings flooded the air. Impossible readings. Executor Vale's expression hardened. That level of distortion should require a planetary-scale energy core. Yes, Executor, but there is no core here. No, Executor. Vale turned slowly toward the archivist. Then what caused it? The recording zoomed closer. The human underneath the machine muttered something inaudible, struck the side of the dispenser with a metal tool, and suddenly the lights inside the workshop exploded blue. For exactly 3 seconds, reality bent. Not metaphorically. Literally. Stars appeared inside the room. Gravity inverted. Time signatures fractured. Then everything snapped back to normal. The human blinked once at the machine, then smiled tiredly and said, "Huh, guess that fixed it." Several tribunal representatives physically recoiled. One ancient delegate from the Varelian collective stood abruptly. Impossible. No conscious species could survive accidental contact with raw dimensional instability. The archivist looked pale. That human did not merely survive. A final scan appeared beside the recording. He created it. Now the chamber erupted. Arguments. Fear. Demands for immediate sterilization. Warnings from military advisors. Ancient species invoking forgotten prophecies. No one had spoken aloud for millennia. But Executor Vale remained motionless, watching the human, watching the smile. Because buried beneath the chaos of tribunal, one horrifying realization had begun to take shape. The human had not looked surprised. And somewhere far beyond Earth's solar system, something enormous had just awakened in response. For days after the emergency tribunal session, the first alien vessel entered Earth's solar system completely undetected. Not because human sensors were weak, not because the ship was cloaked, but because the vessel existed half a second outside conventional time. To the civilizations of the Galactic Accord, temporal offset travel was ancient technology, refined over thousands of years into perfect precision. Ships phased gently between measurable intervals of reality, slipping unnoticed through the dark currents between stars. Humanity, however, had no concept of temporal masking, which was exactly why the observers aboard the alien vessel were nervous. Confirm local civilization awareness, Commander Thalen ordered quietly. The silver-skinned analyst beside him studied the glowing streams of planetary communications flowing across the chamber. No indication they had detected us. Military response? None. Orbital scans? The analyst hesitated. That is complicated. Thalen turned slowly. Explain. The analyst enlarged several intercepted transmissions from Earth. The humans are currently broadcasting over 11 million simultaneous live entertainment feeds. Approximately 300,000 involve simulated warfare. Another 80,000 involve public arguments over fictional narratives. One transmission appears to show humans voluntarily consuming chemically dangerous food while competing to remain conscious. Thalen stared blankly. Why? We do not know. Another observer leaned forward from his console. Commander, there is more. A holographic image expanded above the room. The Engineering Expo and New Carthage Orbital Station rotated slowly before them, hanging above Earth like a glowing mechanical crown. Thousands of vessels surrounded the structure. Cargo freighters, prototype engines, civilian transports, experimental ships built by independent corporations, and humans everywhere, running, shouting, laughing, improvising. The entire station looked less like a center of scientific advancement and more like controlled disaster. No centralized order? One observer asked uneasily. Minimal. No coordinated movement? None detected. Then how does anything function? Nobody answered, because despite the apparent chaos, everything somehow worked. Cargo moved efficiently. Repairs happened rapidly. Traffic collisions were almost non-existent despite horrifyingly loose flight formations. Human workers adapted constantly, solving problems before predictive systems could even identify them. It offended every principle the Galactic Accord believed about intelligent civilization. Commander Thalen watched silently as a fuel drone narrowly avoided crashing into a maintenance platform after a human technician physically kicked it mid-flight while drinking from a steaming cup. The drone stabilized. The technician never even looked up. What probability model governs a species? Thalen finally asked. No one in the room responded, because there wasn't one. Hours later, hidden among the endless crowds inside New Carthage Station, the observers encountered the human responsible for Tribunal's growing unease. Elias Mercer looked nothing like a threat. That fact alone disturbed Thalen more than he expected. The human stood beneath the exposed engine core of a battered cargo vessel with grease covering both arms and music blasting loudly from nearby speakers. Sparks rained around him while two exhausted dock workers argued over overheating stabilizers. "Your calculations are wrong," one worker snapped. "My calculations are perfect," the other shouted back. Elias slid out from beneath the engine, holding a wrench between his teeth. Then the universe probably changed the rules again. "That isn't funny," one worker groaned. "It kinda is." Thalen narrowed his eyes. That smile again. Not confidence, not ignorance. Something stranger. The smile of someone who expected reality itself to malfunction eventually. A nearby alarm suddenly erupted across the dock. Warning: experimental drive instability detected. Several workers cursed simultaneously as the cargo vessel's exposed reactor core began flashing violent red. Energy spikes surged through nearby systems. Dock drones scattered automatically. One of the workers turned pale. Containment failure. "How bad?" Elias asked. "Bad enough to vaporize half the dock." Thalen immediately activated internal combat protocols. Around him, disguised observers subtly repositioned themselves. Standard procedure required silent extraction before the humans triggered catastrophic detonation. Then Elias did something insane. He climbed directly into the engine chamber. "What is he doing?" one observer whispered. "He's dead," another answered. Inside the exposed core housing, arcs of unstable plasma ripped through the air. Emergency system screamed. Every known safety protocol demanded evacuation. Elias ignored all of them. He studied the reactor for exactly 3 seconds, then laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh," he muttered. "You idiots reversed the magnetic polarity." One dock worker blinked. "That should be impossible." "Yeah, well..." Elias grabbed 2 loose conduits with his bare hands. "Impossible's having a busy week." Commander Thalen stood frozen as a human rerouted unstable energy manually through systems that absolutely should not have been connected. The reactor's output surged violently. Observers throughout the dock instinctively braced for detonation. Instead, the engine stabilized. Total silence followed. One worker stared into the chamber. "How did you even know that would work?" Elias climbed back out slowly, smoke rising from one sleeve. "I didn't." The dock workers burst into relieved laughter. Thalen felt cold, because the human wasn't joking. He genuinely had not known, and yet he acted anyway. The observers retreated shortly afterward to avoid detection, but the damage had already been done. Back aboard the hidden vessel, Tribunal analysts replayed the footage repeatedly in growing discomfort. He made a decision with no predictive certainty. One analyst said carefully, "Correction," another replied. He acted despite lacking predictive certainty. That behavior borders on suicidal. "No," Commander Thalen murmured quietly. "It borders on adaptive." The chamber fell silent, because that distinction mattered. A great deal. One analyst activated deeper scans of Elias Mercer's neurological activity recorded during the incident. "Commander, you should see this." Brainwave patterns expanded across the room. Then probability fields appeared beside them. Every observer stiffened immediately. Localized statistical fluctuations surrounded the human during the reactor event. Tiny distortions, barely measurable, but impossible to ignore once noticed. Random systems aligned unexpectedly near him. Outcomes shifted slightly outside predicted margins. Coincidences clustered around human decisions at mathematically improbable rates. The same anomaly from the tribunal report. Only now it was worse, because it wasn't isolated. It was happening constantly. Commander Thalen looked toward Earth, hanging silently beyond the observation glass. Millions of humans below, billions soon enough, all making irrational choices every second, all introducing tiny fractures into predictable systems. And if the Tribunal's oldest fears were correct, those fractures were growing. Suddenly another alert flashed across the chamber. Deep lunar scans had detected unauthorized activity beneath Earth's moon. Ancient activity. Something buried. Something dormant. And according to the incoming readings, one specific human authorization signature had just triggered the first activation sequence in over 2 million years. Elias Mercer's. The moon had no business transmitting signals. That was humanity's first problem. The second was that the signal wasn't being sent outward from the lunar surface. It was originating from somewhere deep beneath it. 3 hours after the activation alert, every major observatory on Earth pointed toward the moon in growing confusion. Governments denied unusual activity publicly, while privately redirecting military satellites and deep space monitoring systems into emergency synchronization. None of them understood what they were seeing. Ancient geometric pulses rippled beneath the lunar crust in perfect intervals, too precise to be natural yet impossibly old according to spectral dating. The signals phased through matter itself, bypassing rock and metal as though the moon were hollow, which, according to several increasingly terrified scientists, it suddenly appeared to be. Elias Mercer stared at the classified feed inside a secured conference room beneath New Carthage Station, while exhausted military officials argued around him. "You're telling me the moon has a heartbeat now?" One admiral snapped. "It is not a heartbeat," a physicist replied sharply. "It's a synchronization pattern." "With what?" The physicist hesitated. "That's the problem. We don't know." At the center of the room, the holographic projection rotated slowly. Beneath the moon's crust, impossible structures had begun revealing themselves layer by layer, as though something hidden for millions of years was gradually waking up. Entire sections of lunar rock no longer matched known geology. Metallic veins stretched for hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. Vast chambers appeared and disappeared depending on the angle of observation, violating normal spatial geometry. And every time Elias got close to the display, the signal intensified slightly. Nobody had mentioned that part aloud yet, but everyone noticed. "You touched the device?" Director Hale finally asked. Elias rubbed the back of his neck uneasily. "I didn't even know it was a device." That much was true. 2 nights earlier, while scavenging abandoned maintenance tunnels beneath the station, Elias had discovered a sealed chamber hidden behind obsolete reactor shielding. Inside rested a black metallic sphere no larger than his fist. No seams, no markings, no visible technology. He had picked it up because he thought it looked valuable. 30 seconds later, the moon activated. Now the entire solar system was changing around him. Another pulse rolled through the station. The lights dimmed briefly. Somewhere nearby, metal groaned. Every person in the room went silent. The physicist checked his readings again and slowly paled. "The fluctuations are increasing." "How much?" Hale asked. "Exponentially." Before anyone could respond, alarm suddenly erupted across the station. "Warning. Localized gravitational instability detected." The floor tilted violently. Coffee cups rose into the air. For one impossible second, gravity reversed across the entire room. Then everything crashed back down. Shouting exploded instantly. What the hell was that? Containment breach? No reactor anomalies. Elias looked toward the holographic moon projection. The pulse had synchronized perfectly with the gravity shift. And somehow, he already knew another one was coming. Far above Earth, hidden within temporal offset space, Commander Thalen watched the chaos unfold with growing dread. "This escalation is too rapid," one observer warned. "The probability distortions are spreading beyond localized human interaction." "Impossible," another replied. "The effect should remain neurologically contained." "Then explain the moon." Nobody could. Ancient records recovered from pre-collapse archives describe civilizations capable of destabilizing causal systems merely through collective cognition. Entire wars had reportedly been fought using probability manipulation, so subtle victims never realized reality itself had turned against them. Those civilizations were extinct now, destroyed before they could evolve further. Commander Thalen had always believed those stories were exaggerations, until humanity. He replayed the footage of Elias stabilizing the reactor again, then slowed it frame by frame. Tiny anomalies appeared around the human constantly, negligible individually, impossible collectively. A loose bolt falling exactly where needed, an overloaded conduit surviving milliseconds longer than material tolerances allowed, micro-events shifting toward survival outcomes. Not miracles, not magic, something worse. Statistical defiance. Commander, an analyst said quietly, there's another issue. A new transmission appeared, not from Earth, from deep space. Thalen's expression hardened immediately. The source identifier belonged to an extinct species, the Ethrin, ancient architects of the collapse wars. The transmission itself was old beyond comprehension, buried dormant until the lunar activation awakened automatically. A figure appeared on screen, and Earth was terrified. You need to disappear. Director Hale told Elias urgently inside a secured underground transit tunnel. Every intelligence agency on the planet is looking for you. I didn't do anything. That stopped matching the moment the moon started reacting to your heartbeat. Elias stopped walking. What? Hale handed him a classified tablet silently. Medical scans filled the screen. Lunar pulse intervals, neural readings, cardiac rhythms, perfect synchronization. Elias felt his stomach tighten. That's impossible. Yeah, Hale replied tiredly. We're getting real familiar with that word lately. Before Elias could answer, the tunnel lights suddenly dimmed, then turned red. A low vibration rolled through the walls around them. Not mechanical, alive. Both men froze. Far above them, across the surface of Earth, millions of people looked toward the night sky simultaneously as glowing fractures spread across the moon. Entire continents lost power. The oceans shifted unnaturally. And for the first time in recorded history, humanity heard something speak from space. Not through radios, not through speakers, directly into their minds, preparing evaluation. Every human on Earth heard the same voice. Calm, ancient, inhuman. Panic detonated globally. Cars crashed instantly. Aircraft diverted mid-flight. Military command systems overloaded under communication surges. And then the second message came. Species status, unstable. A pause followed, as though whatever intelligence existed beneath the moon was studying humanity in real time. Then, potential threat level, undefined. That frightened the aliens far more than the humans, because undefined was not a recognized classification in ancient Ethrin systems. Commander Thalen stared at the transmission logs in disbelief. It cannot categorize them. No, an analyst whispered. Another alert interrupted them. The unknown fleet near Saturn had finally become visible, and every observer aboard the hidden vessel recoiled instinctively. The ships looked wrong. Their forms shifted continuously between geometric states. Impossible angles folding through one another like reality couldn't fully process their existence. Massive structures drifted silently through space, while stars bent unnaturally around them. One observer went pale. Commander, he already knew. Ancient memory records called them the Null Choir, a civilization so advanced they no longer obeyed fixed physical law. A species rumored to emerge only when probability instability threatened galactic equilibrium, which meant they were here for one reason: humanity. Meanwhile, on Earth, Elias struggled to breathe as another pulse slammed through his skull. This one carried images. Impossible images. Burning stars. Dead galaxies. Civilizations collapsing under waves of cascading reality fractures. And humans standing at the center of all of it, not causing the destruction intentionally, just existing near it. He stumbled against the tunnel wall. Hale grabbed him immediately. Elias barely heard him, because hidden beneath the flood of alien visions, one terrifying realization had finally become clear. The moon was not a prison. It was a lock, and someone or something was trying to open it completely. The object beneath the moon opened 3 days later. Not all at once. Not dramatically. There was no explosion, No beam of light cutting across the stars, no triumphant arrival from ancient gods. Instead, a single section of the lunar surface folded inward like paper. Every observatory on Earth recorded it. Every alien fleet in the solar system stopped moving. And every human being alive felt the exact same sensation at the exact same moment. Something had noticed them. Global communication networks nearly collapsed under the surge of simultaneous panic. Emergency broadcasts flooded every channel, while governments desperately tried to maintain order. But fear had already outrun information. People screamed in crowded streets without understanding why. Children woke crying before the lunar event even appeared on news feeds. Entire cities froze beneath a pressure no one could explain. Humanity had just become aware of a predator staring back. Deep beneath New Carthage Station, Elias sat restrained inside a sealed research chamber while scientists monitored the violent fluctuations surrounding his nervous system. The room looked less like a laboratory now and more like a war bunker. Armed security teams lined every entrance. Military drones hovered overhead. None of it mattered, because every machine near Elias continued malfunctioning. A monitor briefly displayed tomorrow's date before correcting itself. A cracked light fixture repaired itself for 3 seconds, then shattered again. One security drone became convinced the floor was the ceiling and launched itself directly into reinforced concrete. The researchers had stopped calling the incidents random. "What am I?" Elias finally asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately. Director Hale looked exhausted, older somehow. "We thought humans were triggering external phenomena," she admitted carefully. That assumption was wrong. He looked up slowly. "Then what's happening?" The room darkened as the lunar transmission reactivated. This time the voice spoke only to Elias. "Emergence confirmed." His restraints trembled violently. "What does that mean?" For several seconds, nothing responded. Then the chamber screens exploded into life simultaneously. Ancient stars filled the room. Dead worlds. Broken civilizations. Entire systems collapsing into impossible distortions that bent light and gravity into spiraling fractures. A new voice replaced the lunar signal. Different, weaker, terrified. This archive was created by the Ethrin Continuity Initiative. The recording began. "If human pattern cognition has reappeared, containment has already failed." Elias stared at the projection. The alien speaking looked sick, hollow-eyed, surrounded by ruins. "We believed intelligence evolved toward order." The recording continued. "We were wrong." Images flashed rapidly behind the speaker. Civilizations governed by flawless predictive systems. Perfect economies. Perfect wars. Perfect stability. Then humanity appeared among them like fire entering dry forest. Not conquering. Not attacking. Changing things. The distortions began small. Coincidences. Improbable survival events. Innovations without logical developmental pathways. Then entire probability systems destabilized. The recording flickered violently. "Human cognition does not process reality passively," the alien whispered. "It pressures it." Elias felt cold. "We discovered this too late. Conscious expectation alters statistical resistance fields around human neural structures. Hope, fear, defiance, creativity, collective emotional synchronization amplifies the effect exponentially." Director Hale slowly stepped backward. One scientist whispered, "That's impossible." "No!" The recording replied instantly, as though hearing him across millions of years. "It is simply incompatible with stable causality." New images flooded the chamber. Human beings surviving impossible situations. Weapons failing at critical moments. Broken machinery functioning beyond design limitations. People succeeding specifically because they ignore predictable limitations. Not miracles. Pressure. Human consciousness subtly forcing probability toward desired outcomes. The stronger the emotion, the stronger the distortion. And now there were billions of them. Elias finally understood why the galaxy feared humanity. Not because humans were violent. Not because they were technologically superior. Because reality itself behaved differently around them. The recording continued. At low population scales, the effect appears beneficial, adaptive, evolutionary. The aliens' expression darkened. At higher synchronization levels, civilizations collapse. The chamber screen subtly displayed enormous spiraling fractures spreading through galaxies. Stars vanished. Entire sectors folded inward. Physical laws unraveled. We called it cascade failure. Silence filled the room. Then came the worst part. The final stage occurs when humanity becomes aware of itself. Every person in the chamber slowly turned toward Elias. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he genuinely looked afraid. Above Earth, the alien fleets had stopped hiding entirely. Thousands of ships now hovered openly beyond lunar orbit, while humanity watched in collective terror. Governments prepared defenses they knew were meaningless. Religious movements exploded overnight. Some humans demanded surrender. Others demanded retaliation. And with every emotional surge spreading across the planet, reality grew less stable. Commander Thalen stood inside the observer vessel watching Earth's probability fields intensify across tactical displays. The distortions were no longer localized. Entire cities now generated measurable statistical anomalies. Human belief itself was becoming contagious. One analyst looked horrified. "Commander, they're synchronizing." Thalen didn't respond, because he could see it too. Humanity was emotionally converging for the first time in its history. Fear united them. And according to the Ethrin records, that was the trigger. Another alarm erupted through the vessel. The null choir had moved. The impossible fleet surrounding Saturn folded through space-time instantly, appearing near Earth without crossing the distance between. Their ships towered over entire continents, twisting against reality like living equations. Then they transmitted a single message across every frequency in the solar system. The lock is failing. Panic spread instantly among the alien fleets. Even the vast Dominion ships repositioned defensively. Elias stared upward through the research chamber skylight as the impossible vessels filled Earth's orbit. "What lock?" he whispered. The answer came from the moon itself. Not spoken. Felt. A memory older than language slammed into his mind. Humanity running. Not from aliens. Not from extinction. From themselves. Elias collapsed to his knees as impossible visions tore through him. Ancient humans. Different. Changed. Civilizations capable of reshaping stars accidentally during emotional conflict. Wars that erase timelines. Entire realities broken under collective rage and desperation. And buried beneath all of it, one final truth emerged like a blade. Humanity was not evolving into something dangerous. Humanity had already existed once before. And the moon was never meant to keep something out. It was built to keep humanity asleep. Earth stopped feeling real after the awakening. At first, the changes were subtle enough for governments to deny. Probability fluctuations, localized physics instability, electronic systems behaving unpredictably during moments of intense human emotion. Then Tokyo survived an earthquake that should have killed 80,000 people. Buildings collapsed around pedestrians without touching them. Entire highways split apart while packed traffic somehow threaded safely through the destruction with casualty rates so statistically impossible that emergency response AIs flagged the event as corrupted data. 3 hours later, a hospital in Sao Paulo lost all power during critical surgeries. Not one patient died. Backup systems activated despite being physically disconnected from the grid. Doctors later swore some machines appeared to restart before technicians repaired them. Nobody laughed at those stories anymore, because the same impossible things were happening everywhere. Humanity was changing reality accidentally, and the galaxy was watching in horror. Above Earth, the vast Dominion fleet moved into full planetary suppression formation. Massive weapons platforms unfolded slowly around the planet, while thousands of alien vessels synchronized targeting matrices toward major population centers. Commander Thalen watched the deployment from the observer ship with growing dread. They're preparing sterilization protocols. One analyst whispered. Another observer turned sharply. Then we intervene now. With what? Another snapped back. A diplomatic complaint? They cannot be allowed to destroy an uncontacted civilization. They cannot be allowed to awaken fully either. The chamber erupted into argument. Thalen ignored them, because below the chaos, Another truth was becoming unavoidable. The Voss were afraid. One of the oldest military powers in the galaxy had arrived expecting primitive humans. What they found instead was a species capable of destabilizing causal systems unconsciously, and fear made intelligent species dangerous, especially species carrying planet-killing weapons. Back on Earth, Elias Mercer sat alone inside a containment chamber specifically redesigned every 6 hours because the previous versions kept malfunctioning around him. Nothing electronic survived prolonged exposure anymore. One security camera looped footage from. Tomorrow, a reinforced wall temporarily became transparent during one of his panic attacks. An armed guard accidentally walked through a locked door after convincing himself it was open. Human researchers had stopped trying to understand the phenomenon scientifically. Now they simply measured escalation rates. And the rates were accelerating. Director Hale entered the chamber, carrying a stack of printed documents instead of digital tablets. We lost another satellite network. Elias rubbed exhausted eyes. My fault. That's the problem. Hale admitted quietly. We genuinely don't know anymore. She sat across from him slowly. Outside the reinforced glass, scientists hurried between stations, while alarms flickered intermittently overhead. How bad is it? Hale hesitated. Then she handed him a photograph. A child standing in the ruins of a collapsed apartment complex. Alive. Completely untouched. Around her, concrete slabs weighing tons rested at impossible angles, suspended in ways that violated structural mechanics entirely. She told rescuers she didn't want her mother to die. Hale said softly, so the building didn't fall. Elias stared silently at the image. She's 7. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Elias whispered, We're doing this. Hale nodded once. Yes. Another pulse rolled through Earth at that exact moment. This one stronger than before. Across the planet, lights flickered. Storm systems shifted direction. Entire sections of the internet experienced simultaneous hallucination-like glitches, where millions of users briefly saw images of unfamiliar stars. And buried beneath the moon, the ancient structure continued opening. The Null Choir moved closer. For the first time since entering the solar system, one of their colossal vessels descended toward Earth openly. The ship unfolded through layers of reality rather than atmosphere, appearing above the Atlantic Ocean like a wound in space itself. Every military force on the planet targeted it instantly. The ship ignored them. Then the oceans beneath it stopped moving. Waves froze. Entire storm systems went silent. Humanity watched live as the impossible vessel transmitted a message directly into every conscious mind on Earth. You are approaching critical emergence. Millions collapsed instantly from the psychic pressure. Others screamed. But some humans, very few, felt something else. Recognition. Elias felt it strongest. The ship wasn't threatening humanity. It was warning them. What are we? He demanded aloud. The answer arrived immediately. The species that breaks reality through desire. The oceans resumed violently. Global panic detonated. Military launches activated worldwide, despite government attempts to prevent escalation. Several nations interpreted the transmission as hostile invasion. Orbital defense systems powered up. Nuclear submarines moved into firing positions. And every rising human fear amplified the distortions further. Probability fields surrounding Earth surged visibly now, bending orbital calculations around the planet itself. One Voss commander aboard the sterilization fleet finally snapped. Enough. The order spread instantly across the armada. Planetary annihilation sequence initiated. Commander Thalen spun toward his tactical officer. They're firing. They believe emergence has already begun. They'll destabilize the entire sector. The officer looked pale. The Voss no longer care. Above Earth, colossal weapons charged silently. Humanity saw them. For one terrible moment, billions of people shared the exact same emotion, extinction, and reality broke. Not metaphorically. Literally, every weapon in the Voss fleet discharged simultaneously. None of the blasts reached Earth. Space twisted violently around the planet as billions of terrified human minds unconsciously forced survival into existence. Light bent backward. Distances folded. Entire attack vectors curved impossibly away from the planet before detonating harmlessly deep in empty space. Silence consumed every fleet in orbit. Even the null choir stopped moving, because no species had ever witnessed planetary-scale probability rejection before. Humanity had just done the impossible, collectively, without understanding how. On Earth, billions stared upward in shock as alien weapons failed against nothing. Elias collapsed forward inside the containment chamber, blood running from his nose. And somewhere beneath the moon, ancient systems began screaming warnings in languages dead for millions of years. Because humanity had crossed the threshold. The awakening was no longer theoretical. It had begun. The galaxy's fear of humanity transformed overnight into something far worse. Reverence, not admiration, not respect. The kind of reverent civilizations reserved for natural disasters they could not stop. Above Earth, the surviving Voss fleet retreated beyond lunar orbit for the first time in recorded military history. Across thousands of alien vessels, tactical systems replayed the failed sterilization attack endlessly, searching for malfunction, sabotage, computational corruption, anything except the truth. There was none. Humanity had simply refused to die. Commander Thalen stood in stunned silence as analysts struggled to explain what every sensor already confirmed. Billions of human minds, unified through fear, had unconsciously altered causality itself. Not shields, not technology. Reality. One observer finally spoke the thought none of them wanted voiced. If they learned to control this. Nobody answered, because every civilization in the chamber imagined the same thing at once. A species capable of reshaping existence emotionally. A civilization where anger could become a weapon, where hope could distort physics, where collective desperation could override natural law itself. The implications were beyond military catastrophe. It threatened the foundation of order reality the galaxy depended upon. Then the null choir transmitted again, this time only to the alien fleets. The final stage approaches. Panic spread immediately. Several fleets began emergency withdrawal calculations. Others powered weapons again, despite what had just happened. Entire command structures fractured under conflicting orders. But the next message silenced them all. Humanity must choose. Commander Thalen felt cold, because now he understood the true purpose of the lunar lock. Not imprisonment. Delay. Someone had once given humanity time to remain human before emergence transformed them into something else entirely. And according to the ancient warnings, that time was running out. On Earth, society had begun splitting apart, not through war, through belief. Some humans saw the awakening as evolution, the next step for their species. Online movements exploded overnight, celebrating humanity's newfound abilities as liberation from limitation itself. Others viewed it as the beginning of extinction. Religious groups declared humanity cursed. Governments attempted mass emotional regulation campaigns to reduce synchronized instability. Entire cities enforced mandatory curfews to minimize panic clustering. Entertainment broadcasts became state-controlled in several countries after researchers discovered emotionally charged media could trigger localized distortions. None of it worked. Humanity was too connected now, too aware. Every fear amplified another. Every hope spread faster. And beneath it all, the awakening continued growing. Elias Mercer watched the world fracture from inside the lunar facility itself, because the moon had finally opened completely. The chamber beneath its surface stretched larger than cities, built from impossible black structures that hummed softly with ancient power. Symbols moved across the walls like living equations, while vast machines continued operating after millions of dormant years. Humanity had never built this place, but humanity had absolutely been here before. That realization haunted Elias more than anything else. "You still think we're the same species?" Director Hale asked quietly beside him. They stood overlooking a colossal holographic archive, suspended above an abyss deeper than the facility itself. Human figures rotated slowly inside the projection, except they weren't entirely human. Their eyes glowed faintly. Gravity distorted subtly around them, and the stars behind them bent unnaturally as they moved. "They look like us," Elias whispered. "No," Hale replied softly. "They look like what comes after us." The archive shifted again. Now entire civilizations appeared. Ancient humanity spanning impossible distances across galaxies long before recorded alien history. Vast structures manipulated suns like machinery. Fleets folded spacetime casually. Probability storms rippled around populated worlds constantly. And then came the war, reality itself breaking apart. Human factions fighting one another with weapons that erased outcomes before they occurred. Entire timelines collapsing. Star systems vanishing because populations collectively fear destruction strongly enough to accidentally create it. The final recording showed the survivors. Terrified, desperate, they had sealed themselves away, buried their civilization, altered their descendants genetically, created primitive humanity intentionally, not to weaken the species, to save the universe from them. Elias stared numbly at the final line of translated text suspended above the archive. Suppression maintained until psychological maturity achieved. Director Hale exhaled slowly. We were never evolving. No, Elias murmured. We were recovering. Suddenly alarms erupted across the lunar chamber. Not human alarms. Ancient ones. The holographic archive flickered violently as massive energy surges rolled through the structure. Then the facility displayed incoming fleet signatures. Thousands of them. The Galactic Accord had arrived in full. Commander Thalen appeared moments later through emergency quantum projection, his expression grim. You need to listen carefully. Elias turned toward him. The Accord has voted. Hale stiffened immediately. What vote? Thalen hesitated, then answered quietly. They've authorized neurosuppression. Silence. Elias frowned. What does that mean? The alien commander looked genuinely ashamed. They intend to permanently limit humanity's emotional synchronization capacity. Your species would survive, but emergence would stop. Hale's face hardened instantly. You're talking about lobotomizing an entire civilization. The alternative, Thalen snapped suddenly, may be universal collapse. The chamber fell silent, because for the first time since meeting him, the alien commander looked afraid, not of humanity. For them. Thalen stepped closer to projection. You think the galaxy fears your power because of conquest? Because of violence? No. We fear what happens when suffering reaches your species at scale. He activated ancient archive footage. Human civilizations collapsing under grief. Entire stars dimming from synchronized despair. Reality tearing itself apart during moments of mass emotional trauma. You don't understand your own minds yet, Thalen said quietly. And if emergence completes before you do, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Another alarm interrupted them, this one from Earth. Massive unrest had erupted across the planet after fragments of the truth leaked publicly. Millions demanded humanity reject suppression entirely. Others begged governments to accept it before things worsened. Humanity stood divided against itself, and the distortions were accelerating again. Then the final warning appeared across every screen in the lunar chamber. Emergence threshold, 92%. Beneath the warning, another message slowly materialized. External entity approaching. Every person in the room froze. Even Thalen looked confused. Then the stars outside the moon changed. Not moved. Changed. Entire constellations twisted unnaturally as something enormous approached the galaxy itself. Something ancient. Something drawn toward awakened humanity. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the Null Choir finally showed fear. The thing approaching the galaxy did not travel through space. It traveled through certainty. Stars dimmed wherever it passed, not because they were destroyed, but because physical law itself began reorganizing around its presence. Across thousands of systems, prediction engines failed simultaneously. Quantum networks collapsed into meaningless static. Entire civilizations lost the ability to calculate future outcomes beyond a few minutes. Panic spread to the Galactic Accord faster than light itself, because the approaching entity had a name. The Devourer, not a species, not a fleet, a phenomenon. Ancient records described it as the inevitable consequence of perfectly ordered civilizations, a predatory intelligence that emerged wherever reality became too rigid, too predictable, too mathematically stable. And for millions of years, the galaxy had unknowingly fed it. every controlled society, every optimized civilization, every perfectly ordered empire. All of it strengthened the thing now approaching Earth. Commander Thalen stood frozen inside the lunar archive as new data flooded across tactical projections. It's accelerating. Director Hale looked toward him sharply. Toward Earth. No, he whispered. Toward humanity. The truth settled across the chamber like ice. The Devourer wasn't here to destroy humans. It was here because humans were the first thing in millions of years capable of resisting it. Outside the moon, alien fleets began retreating in every direction. Entire armadas fled toward deep space jump points without coordination. Even the vast Dominion abandoned formation discipline completely. The oldest civilizations in the galaxy were running because they had fought the Devourer before and lost. Only the Null Choir remained motionless. Their impossible vessels surrounded Earth silently while reality bent around them in slow spirals. Then they transmitted one final message. Order created a Devourer. Chaos can unmake it. On Earth, humanity watched the stars distort above them while governments collapsed under global fear. Cities flooded with riots and prayers simultaneously. Some people demanded surrender to the suppression protocols. Others demanded humanity embrace emergence completely. But something strange had begun happening amid the panic. Humans started helping each other. Not strategically, not logically, instinctively. Millions volunteered at hospitals despite the danger. Strangers protected one another during infrastructure failures. Entire communities shared food, shelter, and power without waiting for instruction. And every act of hope stabilized reality slightly. Scientists noticed first. Then the Lunar Archive confirmed it. Fear amplified destructive distortions. But connection balanced them. Elias stared at the data in disbelief. Human emotion isn't the problem. Director Hale looked up slowly. It's isolation. The ancient archive responded instantly. Correct. New sections of hidden history unfolded across the chamber. Ancient humanity had not destroyed itself because of power. It happened because emergence evolved faster than emotional maturity. Fear became weaponized. Grief became catastrophic. Entire civilizations collapsed under unchecked collective trauma. But the records also showed something else. The only moments humanity ever stabilized reality were moments of unity. Sacrifice, trust, hope, not perfection, connection. Commander Thalen exhaled slowly as realization spread through him. That's why the suppression failed. Elias turned toward him. You can't remove chaos from humans without removing what makes us human. Above Earth, the Devourer finally arrived. The stars screamed. There was no other word for it. Space itself twisted inward as an impossible darkness unfolded across the solar system. Not blackness. Absence. Entire regions of existence became silent and empty wherever the entity spread. Alien fleets vanished, instantly attempting escape. Not destroyed. Erased from probability entirely. The vast Dominion's greatest warship fired planet-killing weapons directly into the darkness. The attacks never happened. Reality simply rejected the action retroactively. Humanity watched live as one of the galaxy's most feared civilizations broke apart in terror. And then the Devourer turned toward Earth. Every human being felt it immediately. The pressure, the certainty, the unbearable weight of a force that wanted existence itself predictable and still. People began collapsing worldwide, not physically, emotionally. Hopelessness spread like poison through the species, and reality began failing with it. Buildings flickered, storms froze in place, entire coastlines shifted unpredictably. The awakening spiraled toward total collapse. Inside the Lunar Archive, alarms screamed continuously. Emergence cascade imminent. Elias looked toward the projections of ancient humanity surrounding him. Wars, extinction, failure. Then toward Earth, toward billions of terrified people trying desperately not to fall apart. And suddenly he understood something the ancient humans never had. Humanity's strength was never power. It was each other. He activated the lunar network. Globally, every human mind connected instantly, not controlled. Connected for one impossible moment. Humanity felt itself completely. Every fear, every hope, every loss, every dream. Billions of lives intertwined simultaneously. The grief nearly shattered them. Then something unexpected happened. People stayed. Strangers comforted strangers across continents. Soldiers lowered weapons. Families held each other. Entire cities erupted into unified act of defiance against the terror crushing planet. Humanity chose one another, and the awakening changed. The distortion stabilized. Reality stopped breaking. The Devourer hesitated for the first time, because it could not process humanity. Every civilization it consumed had pursued order through control. Humans pursued survival through connection, through irrational compassion, through impossible hope. Probabilities shifted violently across the solar system. The Devourer moved closer. Humanity moved first, not with weapons, with chaos. Millions of human minds surged together unpredictably, generating a storm of emotional contradiction the entity could not calculate. Love and grief, humor and rage, terror and determination, an explosion of irrational humanity so wildly unstable that the Devourer's perfect predictive structure began collapsing under it. The darkness fractured, stars reignited. Across the galaxy, civilizations watched in disbelief as humanity weaponized the one thing no ancient empire had ever valued: imperfection. The Devourer screamed silently as reality rejected its order completely. Then it vanished, not destroyed, driven away by something it fundamentally could not understand. Humanity. Silence settled slowly across the solar system. Earth remained intact. The stars stabilized. And for the first time in millions of years, the galaxy faced a truth more terrifying and beautiful than any civilization had imagined. Humanity was never the mistake. Humanity was the correction. Somewhere above Earth, the colossal vessels of the Null Choir slowly turned toward the stars once more. Before leaving, they transmitted one final message across every human mind. You are no longer asleep. Then they vanished into the dark between galaxies.